Welcome, everybody. It says we're having a little technical glitch, it sounds like, but welcome, everybody. We're glad that you're here. It's Friday, which means what? It means that it's time for what? Another Live with Kevin. And Friday at noon Eastern time is not the time that my guest is on. I'll explain all of that in just a second. But man, I'm so glad that you're all here with us today. We're going to talk about this really important idea. This important idea that says we've got to use the technology to make the future of work for all of us. And that's where we're going to focus our time today. Let me introduce our guest. Hopefully we have all of our systems working. A little bit of an issue apparently up with one of our platforms. Let's just see if we can fix it there. We're live everywhere now.
Excellent.
So let me introduce my guest. His name is Paul Woods. You can see that. You may not know him. When we were chatting before we went live, he said, you don't need to say too much about me, Kevin. Just say I'm Paul and let's get started. But I'm going to say a little bit. First thing I'm going to say is the man lives in Australia. And so you do the math about the time zone, and he'll tell you what time it is in a minute. He said I set 4 alarms, Kevin, so I can make sure I'm with you. Here's what it means to me. It means the man is committed and excited. In fact, when we got to chatting about him being here, he says, this is important stuff, and I'd be excited to be with you, even if it is, 2 a.m., right?
2 a.m., right? Yeah. 2:01
so
now.
Well, yeah, okay, got it. Yeah, 2:01, I got it. Paul Woods is the founder of Adopt and Embrace, an Australian consultancy that was earlier this month purchased by the European firm Rapid Circle. The company is focused on helping people get their day back through sustainable, relevant, and focused adoption of Microsoft 365 tools, including Microsoft Teams, that it results in real business outcomes, helping improve business processes and work practices with the technology at your fingertips. He's the author of the book, Adopt and Embrace Microsoft Teams, A Manager's Guide to Communication, Coordination, and Collaboration. I'm excited to have him here. And his organization has done all sorts of great stuff. He said, Kevin, that's enough. Just call me Paul. So we're just going to say, Paul, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks, Kevin. Thanks for having me and inviting me along. 202, yeah. That's right. We still haven't figured out the one challenge when it comes to distributed work, and that is people that live in the wrong parts of the world. For whatever meeting that you need to hold, right? There's always someone that's 2 o'clock in the morning or 8 o'clock in the evening or 6 o'clock in the morning. Particularly here in Australia, there are some time zones that are more challenging than others, and about midday Eastern time is about the most challenging time zone for someone on the east coast of Australia. But you're really great to be here. I have had a couple of hours of beauty sleep, so hopefully that's coming through on the video.
Great. You look great. Actually, I want to start because I'm going to guess, since it's 2 o'clock in the morning, at least for the people live, that it's 2 o'clock in the morning for people in Australia. I think a lot of the rest of us, we've heard some stuff in the news about what's going on in Australia in relationship to the pandemic and work, specifically for our purposes. I don't want to have a political conversation. I want to have a work-related conversation. So, what's really up? How are things in Australia, and what's really up there as it relates to what we're all talking about the future of work?
I think in the scheme of things that are happening in the world today, I think the best thing you can say is we're incredibly lucky. That's probably the first thing I'd say. The part of Australia that I'm in, which is Brisbane, which is part of Queensland, we're about an hour's flight north of Sydney. For people that aren't familiar with Australia, we have 0 cases of COVID here at the moment. We are out and about and going about our business like any other thing. We've had an outdoor mask mandate for a while. I think that expired yesterday, so we kind of just have to have masks indoors at the moment. But generally, we're pretty good here in Queensland. South of here in Sydney and Melbourne, they're in lockdowns at the moment just because they've got a bit of the virus spreading, the Delta variant. But it's been interesting the last 18 months in terms of how work has occurred here in Australia, how work has changed here in Australia. And I think it's been an experience that we've seen across the world. And everyone went through this brute force transition to distributed work. So there was a week in March 2020 when, or maybe February if you're kind of ahead of the game, where we went, how are we going to survive as a business? How are we going to remain competitive when we can't have all our people in our traditional workplace, which is a physical office for a lot of knowledge and information workers, right? So yeah, I mean, a lot of organizations have gone through this brute force change, and for some of us, we've been able to kind of start moving back into some normalcy in terms of the way that work used to happen, but taking the best bits forward, obviously. And others are still very much stuck in that feeling of brute force. I'm constrained in the way that I work because of these external factors that I have no control over. And I think particularly in Sydney and Melbourne here in Australia, but we see it around the world as well, is that people are getting exhausted. People are struggling to bring their discretionary energy to work because they feel overwhelmed.
There isn't much of it. Let's
Yeah,
just
exactly. Yeah, and so the challenge, I think, for us here in Australia, the challenge for people in the world is how do we move from this brute force approach to change, which we've gone through. Again, it's a change management challenge ultimately. I think change management's really easy when you don't need to go find executive sponsorship or coach people through change when to survive this business needs to make this change. But now, as we move out of that initial response to more sustainable hybrid work or more sustainable distributed work moving forward, there's some real purposeful stuff that we need to start doing to make sure that sticks and people don't feel exhausted and overwhelmed by that kind of work in the future. So it's interesting, and I suspect, in the scheme of things, we're still pretty lucky here in Australia, despite what the media might be presenting in the United States and other parts of the world as well.
Well, that's why I asked you the question. We'll go right to the source and find out what's really going on, right? And not surprisingly, we're only hearing about what's going on with the major lockdowns. Like when you started, I'm like, I thought there was a story here. There's no story, but there is a story,
story.
Obviously. And
the story is there's no story.
I appreciate that you share that. Yeah. So, we came to be connected because we sort of sought you out because of the name of your company. But the front end of the book, you said, we wrote this book, writing it for the managers because it's in between, the dummies book for Microsoft Teams or whatever, and a huge technical thing. I love that as the writer of the book, The Long Distance Leader. I love that. But I love the name of your company and the start of the book title, which is Adopt and Embrace. And so I want to talk about that. I mean, technology is like the longest 4-letter word for some people, right? So how can we all, regardless of where we are in this process, what's your advice to us about using technology to support? Because you just said it, like we're all moving this direction, and not everyone, but many, and probably anyone who's here is moving in that direction of hybrid and remote work. What can we be doing? How can we use technology to support that better?
That's a really good question, and I think it's not as difficult or it's not as complex a challenge as many people might think it is, right? So I think no matter where you work, in whatever organization that you're in, whatever role you're in, there is technology at your fingertips to do your job. The organization has provided you with technology. So it might be, in the case of most large organizations, you've probably got a Microsoft enterprise agreement where they give you a whole heap of Office 365 and other bits and pieces. But it doesn't have to be just Microsoft technologies. It could be in the Google Cloud. You could be using Zoom and Asana and all these other great tools that are out there to kind of get your work done, right? So your personal choices or your professional choices, irrespective of what technology is there. You don't need to be an expert at everything that's in front of you. So that's probably the first point I try to make. You don't need
Everybody
to be.
can take a deep breath.
Exactly. Despite what the technology team in your organization might say or how they talk to you about this stuff, you don't need to be an expert at everything. And I think that's the first thing, I guess, to create that psychological safety when it comes to thinking about technology and how you apply technology in your work. You don't need to be an expert at all those different things. It's interesting when we talk to organizations, if we talk to executives or leaders one-on-one, there's almost two different types of people that we kind of uncover. There's someone who is incredibly who feels they are incredibly technology literate and feel like they're kind of leading the charge and in their area, and they're the ones kind of showing people how to do things. And then there's everyone else who basically says, I'm the biggest Luddite in the university, I'm the biggest Luddite in this organization, and I don't get technology. And when we actually sit down and talk with people like that, they actually do know some stuff, right? They're not the worst person in the organization. So I think we've got to give ourselves credit in terms of the skills that we bring to the table. But the very long story to say, we don't need to be experts at the technology. What we need to be experts at are the process of work, or the way that we do things, or the business process, or the work practice, and then identifying what are the best bits of that technology that we have at our fingertips to help us improve that process, improve that work practice, or things like that. So if we can kind of have that mindset of, it's not about having to learn another tool or having to learn another thing, and flip it on its head and go, actually, this is about business improvement. This is about process improvement. How can I take this, this process that takes us 7 hours now? If I could do 2 things or 3 things that would help us improve that process by an hour or 3 hours, or cut it back to even 10 minutes, like what are those things? And then what technology choices do I have in front of me that help me actually do that? So it's something, I think, yeah, very long story short to say, you don't need to know everything about the technology and everything it can do, but you have to have this curious mindset to say, hey, I've got a problem here. Something takes too long. Something's maybe too time consuming, too inefficient, too ineffective. I know the technology I've got at my fingertips. How can I connect the dots between those different things to make a real measurable impact in terms of the value that I generate for my team or my organization?
So for all of you that are here watching us live, share your comments, share your questions, because we want to talk about what you want to talk about, not just what I have in my list. I have a list. I have plenty for us, but I'd love to know what you're thinking. So feel free to let us know and do that. And in fact, even if you're watching later, your comments will be read by us. And if there's ways we can point you to something that Paul's written, that we've written, whatever, we'd be happy to do that. So I love your point that technology should enable our business rather than being the starting point, regardless of what the tech team might say and all that. I really love that. And I don't think anyone disagrees with it, but that's not how we often end up thinking about it. One of the things that we often say, I'd love to, agree, disagree, comment on this point is that before you go look for a new technology, look to see if the one you have will do what you need to do first. Want to comment, agree, disagree with that?
I agree. Very violently agree with that. It's probably the best way to describe it. We don't want new technology for the sake of new technology, right? It's just another thing. I think in the book, in the very first chapter, maybe the very first paragraph of the book, I'm trying to think of it back now, we talk about like the introduction of collaboration tools, right? So and the kind of the idea of, oh great, another collaboration tool. We've got 17 of those already. Why do we need an 18th collaboration tool? Right. So and I think people have had that experience, whether it's new email systems or new chat platforms or new project management platforms or new collaboration platforms. There's always something new, and there's always something that could be bought to solve the problem, right? And plenty of technology vendors make quite a lot of money, kind of keeping that cycle moving forward, right? So I think you absolutely need to look at what you've got in front of you. But recognizing sometimes you will need to potentially buy some new technology to improve a process or get that efficiency right. But the way to kind of navigate that, we have a little framework we think about. We call it the 5 C's, and you've actually mentioned a couple of them already in the introduction. But just what we want to do is think about the way that we work as a team, or way that we work as an organization, or the different ways that we want to engage with each other in our organization. And then try and cut through the overwhelm of that technology choice. Because I think a lot of people just feel overwhelmed because there's so many tools they could use that are already there, and plus the new ones. So how do we make it easy for people to navigate that choice? So if you think about the 5 C's that we talk about, in an organization, we do some work where we create content or we create stuff. And that might be our own personal notes. It could be a working draft of a document or something like that. We engage in targeted communication. So we might have a one-on-one call or conversation or chat with someone to kind of talk about a task at hand or something like that. We'll collaborate with each other, so we'll bring a group of people together to work on a project or get an outcome with shared goals that would work together. We'll coordinate a process, so it kind of tracks how things are happening in our organization through watching something go through a particular process. And then we engage in the community of the broader organization. So how do we engage around our core values, our shared mission? How do we we might be in one silo on one part of the organization. How do we engage with other people in our business around our shared goals and values and things like that? So if you think about those 5 different types of work that we do, different ways we engage in our work, what we want to be able to do is say, what are the sensible default technology choices that we can have for each of those different C's? So in case of creating content, so we might have a sensible default in our department or division that we've all kind of agreed to that says, hey, we're going to use, if I use a Microsoft technology, because that's kind of where I live, OneNote for our note taking. And what we might actually do is set that up so their shared notebook, so we can actually see each other's notes as we kind of take notes in our meetings and things like that. So we get that shared understanding of what's going on. For communication, we might use, say, Microsoft Teams, and say we're going to use Microsoft Teams and have asynchronous chat in terms of how we work together quickly. And we're going to say no to email. So we're not going to actually use Outlook for any of our internal email. We'll try and do all that through Teams and maybe through other technologies that we have as well. So basically, long story short, we want to go through all these different types of work that we do and just think about, if there was one technology tool choice that we'd have to do 80% of the things that we do there, what's that one thing? So at least we're all on the same page as a group in terms of consistently applying that technology to get our shared outcomes, whether they be professional or personal.
The thing I like about all that is, and the way that you described it, is that we as the leader don't have to have all the answers.
No.
To that in some ways. Like if we will, especially now, we're 18 months in or whatever, however many months it is now, into all of this hubbub. And the reality is that we've all been experiencing it together. So we as a leader don't have to have all the answers. In fact, we'll be better off if we bring these kinds of questions like Paul's asking to the group and talk about it in that regard, right? I mean, and I think that's a really, really great value. So when we think about technology as it relates to this future of work world, when organizations are trying to adopt and embrace technology, what are the biggest mistakes that they make?
How long have we got?
Not that long.
Look, we've seen plenty. I think the biggest mistake that we see is a technology team trying to drive technology into an organization and a technology team making decisions about how people need to work. And thankfully, that's not as common as it was a few years ago. Like technology teams generally are getting better with more outcome focus or business focus on the way they do things. But it's still technology is rolled out by technologists that probably have a bias towards thinking about things like security and compliance and other bits and pieces, which are really important. But it needs to be balanced with people actually doing their work and getting their job done and getting outcomes, right? So we see very much a spectrum of organizations that have a very militant approach to security and compliance and records management and other bits and pieces, which means that people just can't do their job. So you got to try and get this careful balance between the outcomes that the organization brings. The other ones there, we kind of touched on it briefly, the whole idea of technology for technology's sake. Sometimes there's that shiny new object off in the future that they try and bring in that that we just overwhelm our people with more change for the sake of it without a really clear business benefit, or there's a really clear technology reason to do it. Maybe it helps improve the way we manage that technology, but it's not really clear how they've communicated the business outcomes to the people. That's actually really going to impact as well. So thinking about change management, I've mentioned that a couple of times, but how do we actually bring the workforce on the journey with the new technology that we're bringing into the organization? Change management is not just 8 hours of training workshops or something like that. It's not just throwing on here's your self-service guide, off you go. You use this stuff at home, you'll be fine at the workplace. That's not what change management is. It's around that really a purposeful effort to make sure that people can make the change from where they are today in terms of how they do their work to that future state, and not telling them how to do the work, but guiding them in the right direction, allowing the workforce to make their choices along the way and not be dictated to in terms of how they do that as well. So
I think you're sort of answering my next question, which is about the leader's role. No, it's perfect. It's perfect because, if technology change is driven by technologists, and I'm guessing pretty much everyone is nodding their head like I get it, and it's not all bad, but that's what it is. What can we as individual leaders, maybe we're senior leader, maybe we're a mid-level leader, maybe we're a frontline leader, what can we be doing to mitigate the problems, minimize the risks, make it better?
Look, I think you can be really selfish, to be honest with you. I think there's a really great opportunity for leaders to jump in and make a difference for their team and make a difference for the way that you work by engaging with the technology team and getting what you want out of the process. I think one of the biggest it's not a mistake, it's probably a travesty of technology change programs is technologists do a reasonably poor job of engaging leaders in businesses to get them interested and excited and genuinely part of the process in terms of those technology rollouts. So if you're a passionate leader that wants to improve the way that your team works, you can see clear business problems that need addressing, and you understand that technology can solve that. I think the first thing you can do is to actively engage with your technology team and start having a conversation, so you can guide them in terms of the right direction for not only yourself but the rest of the organization as well. Because I can tell you from the other side of the fence, technologists are starving for that kind of engagement, because sometimes they feel like they're not being listened to by the rest of the business because it's maybe too complex or too overwhelming, or there's other important stuff that's going on in the business at the time, right? There's always fires that need to be put out, and we feel like from a technology team, we're trying to just put more stuff on top of people that maybe already feel overloaded. So as a leader, if you can proactively engage in that process, that's probably the first thing I'd say. The second thing is, as you said before, Kevin, you don't need to have all the answers, but you can have plenty of questions. You can have plenty of problems that you can say, well, these are the kinds of things that we want to solve. These are the kinds of things that we want to achieve. So you might have let's say you're a customer service team. Maybe you're running a customer service team, and so the current channel that we have to engage with our customers is through the telephone and through like a web chat system that we rolled out 6 years ago that doesn't quite meet our needs, right? So if you come to the technology team with business, like stories described as business challenges or business problems, and say, how could we use this technology to solve that problem? So it's not about how do we run meetings better or how do we do whatever, like the commodity work of an organization. Come with like really compelling business challenges or business problems. Say, look, this is where we are today. This is where we want to get to. How does this technology help us improve that experience for our customers? How does that improve this internal experience for our teams? How does this help us increase revenue, reduce costs, reduce risk, whatever those kind of things that you're measured on as a leader that you want to achieve? And if you can engage in that dialogue with your technology team, not only can you shape the impact of the technology for the rest of your organization, but it gives you the front running to get support and more dedicated focus from that technology team to help your team or your department actually achieve what you're trying to achieve as well. So it's a little bit like give and get, like the law of reciprocity absolutely will kick in here. If you proactively support the technology team and helping them guide through the process, you're going to get the support from them back in terms of helping your team stand out above the others in the organization potentially as well.
So you and I could stay talking about the adopt and embrace piece of this, and yet some people are probably here, whether it's live or later, because they saw Microsoft Teams in the title. Like, okay, so let's talk about. I do want to let you go into that expertise, because I know that while what we've been talking about so far, as you said, is technology agnostic largely, and I think that was an important part of this conversation. I also know that there are people sort of starving for some help around Teams. We actually had a question come in. See if I can pull it up here real quick. That may be a good lead into this. And that the question is, so can you describe the advantages of Teams over other collaboration tools? So why don't can you take that for a sec, and then we'll sort of go from there and talk about Microsoft Teams a little bit more.
That's an awesome question, Eric. And I'd say there are advantages and disadvantages with whatever technology choice that you make. So first thing I'd say is I don't think there's one tool to rule them all in terms of the different choices that you have here. But particularly with Microsoft Teams and comparing it to other solutions, it's a really interesting one. If I think about the like tools like Zoom, right? Zoom have done a really great job of creating a compelling video conferencing experience, right? So, and I think we've seen, particularly during the last 18 months, from a personal point of view, people using a lot of Zoom, and also from a professional point of view, obviously using video conferencing to connect people together, right? Microsoft Teams has a great video conferencing capability as well. If you looked at those two things kind of side by side, you'd probably go, oh, Teams is good at this part of that equation, Zoom is good at that part of the equation. But the reality is they still deliver the same capability, right? It's connecting some faces with people on the other side of the world to engage in a conversation. So yeah, they're probably similar in terms of that regard. If you look at things like GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar, like GoToWebinar is probably a more focused, more public broadcast kind of way to deliver a meeting. GoToMeeting is a little bit different. Now, Cisco have their own solutions as well. So there's actually Cisco WebEx Teams. So there's lots of different choices here in terms of those different technologies. So Zoom does a good job of the video conferencing. Teams does a good job as well. These are also good jobs of that stuff. Where Teams is different is Teams takes it to a different dimension in terms of not just having that video conferencing capability, but also the ability to connect people synchronously through like fast chat. but also asynchronously through long-form conversations that you can have in different teams. It brings in document management and document co-authoring capability as well. So if you think about those 5 C's that we talked about earlier, like create, communicate, collaborate, coordinate, and community, Teams actually covers quite a lot of those different C's, whereas Zoom only captures just one of them, which would be communicate, as an example. Teams is an interesting beast. Again, there are some similar products in the marketplace. If you kind of either look at, you could build a best of breed solution, bring a couple of different technologies together, or you could look at other vendors that do that as well. So there are competitors in the marketplace, but Teams just allows you to have a single place where you can bring your team together to get their work done. That's probably the simplest way to think about it. And the best example I can give is when we wrote the book. We actually wrote the book in Microsoft Teams because if we're going to write a book about Teams, we've got to live and breathe it and have this as a real world exemplar story of how you can do it right. So we had a team set up in Microsoft Teams, which we called the Book Factory. We had different channels for the different stages of the work that we need to do to bring the book to market. So we had a channel for the working manuscript, we had a channel for book marketing, we had a channel for our beta readers and others that came in, another channel for the editing process. We kind of thought about what are the priorities that we have as a co-authoring team to bring the book together. We had one Word document for the entire book with 4 co-authors, 2 external editors. We just had one document. That was it. So we didn't have different versions of different Word documents going backwards and forwards or things like that. We just had this one centralized document that we all worked on together from the very first structuring of the book through to the final edited version. And we let the power of Microsoft Teams behind that do all the versioning and all the permissions and other bits and pieces like that to make it a really seamless experience for us to work together. But we had one single space that we were able to engage on video calls to talk about the content. We were able to do our work in the Word document. We were able to have longer form conversations because we had people that never met in person during the writing of the book as well. So everything kind of came together in that one digital space to kind of bring that project together. So that when we think about a collaboration tool, that kind of covers quite a lot of the bases that we're looking at. The one that's probably not as strong on, if I'm completely transparent, is the community part of it. This one is probably a little bit of a philosophy thing we could think about in terms of what is community in an organization. You might have tools like Yammer or Workplace by Facebook in your organizations as well that kind of serve that community role. In some businesses, Teams serves that role as well. You can have like a team that brings all your organization together. In others, you might have that as a separate place, just like you have a separate boardroom or a separate kitchen in your physical workplace. Sometimes having these as separate digital spaces makes a big difference as well in terms of how you can bring people together.
Let me ask you a question.
Like you're going to say something. Yeah.
No, yeah, I was, I'm watching our time. I know I could listen to you for a long time and we could have a long conversation. There's lots more we could do just there, but let's say the organization, the person who's watching or the organization that they represent or are part of is already on Teams, right? That decision's been made. That's where we are. We're down that path. What's something that you think is underutilized by many people in Teams that I think that you think would specifically help them in the future of work?
Yeah, we see this, and this could be by design or it could be just by chance. Some organizations lock down Teams to this kind of experience as well, for a whole number of reasons, which I won't get into. But I'd say most people view Teams as a competitor to Zoom. So if they view it as a video conferencing capability, or it's they might have come from Skype for Business or a technology like that, where they might have instant messaging, right? So it's like one-on-one instant messaging or small group messaging. So there's actually some research released about a month ago by an organization called Swoop Analytics that do a lot of analytics on how people use this technology. And they talked about the most commonly used features in Teams being chat. And we think about chat in Microsoft Teams is that instant messaging kind of scenario. Fast, actionable content backwards and forwards between a few people. I might have a group chat set up, similar to like your WhatsApp group messages. You might have your Signal groups or your Facebook Messenger groups you might have in your personal life, just in the workplace, right? And between video conferencing and that one-on-one chat or that group chat, that's maybe 20% of the value that comes with Teams. I think the real opportunity that you have is to think about how we use more of the collaborative features where you actually set up a team with the channels and work with your documents in the Teams in that environment. Now, some of you might be at that stage in terms of, we use those collaborative spaces. So the next part of the question is how do we get better utilization or better value out of that is how we think about how we structure those spaces. Because probably the biggest challenge we see is people go, all right, we can create a team to do this work. So I'll create a team this way, and then someone else will create a team a different way, and then someone else will create a team a different way, and then you get this proliferation of teams, and you get not only overwhelmed with the technology choices you have now, you have overwhelm of all the different teams I could be a member of, and like where's the information, where can I find it, all that kind of stuff, right? And that's not necessarily a technology issue. That's a work design challenge or work design
we're
issue.
right back where we started.
Exactly.
Work design, business process, all that stuff, right?
Yeah, and like we see some organizations go, well, because it's called teams, we'll create the teams based on our organizational structure. So we'll have a team for marketing, a team for finance, a team for the leadership team, a team for customer service or whatever. And all we're doing when we do that is we're just bringing all the problems that we had with our email distribution lists in Outlook or Gmail or wherever it was, and just moving it into a new technology, right? So we haven't taken the opportunity to change the way they work, to change the way we communicate, collaborate, coordinate together. So I think there's a great opportunity here to kind of rethink how we think about the role of a team, uppercase T, as in terms of the team that we have in Microsoft Teams, and think about how we structure work to be really effective and solve the business problem that's at hand and achieve the outcomes we're trying to achieve. Now, in the book that you talked about, we talked about writing that for managers. We didn't write a book that said, here's how to press all the buttons, and this is what the buttons mean in Microsoft Teams. If we did that, it would have been out of date in about 3 months because the technology changes very quickly. What we wrote about is what is a framework you can use to structure teamwork really well in these technologies. So focusing on a business problem to start with, because if you're grounding this all on a business problem, you're much more likely to convince people to change the way they work because you can see that they're solving a problem in the first place. Being really clear about the purpose.
It's not about a technology.
No,
it's
exactly.
I got to learn this thing. It's about we can create this work more effectively. We can solve this business problem, right?
Yeah, that's it. What's the purpose of us coming together? What people need to be involved? What are our priorities as a group? One of the common questions we get when it comes to Microsoft Teams, and this is the same if you're in Slack or other technologies, right? Is what is the right number of channels? How many channels is the right number of channels? In a team in Microsoft Teams, you can create 250 channels, right? And that's good. But if you think about teamwork and priorities and how many things we can kind of keep at top of mind at any one time, look at the research and go, well, we can only really have 3 to 7 priorities at any one time. Otherwise, we've got too many priorities and we kind of get overwhelmed by stuff and we don't get stuff done. Trying to bring some of that work and science back into this conversation to say, hey, it's not necessarily a technology challenge. It's actually a design of work challenge that we have here. And managers are best placed to decide that. But in the book, so it's teamsbook.info, not teamsbook.com. Pretty close.
That's my fault.
That's all right.
I will fix it right now.
Just
go ahead.
Get onto your favorite search engine, adopt and embrace Microsoft Teams. It's on Amazon. It's on all the different marketplaces where you'll be. Appreciate it if you go out and grab it and let us know what you think of it. But the framework we've got in there, the 10 Ps, just helps you navigate that design challenge, that design conversation. We've got examples of use cases of people applying that framework in there as well, so you can see that. But what that will mean is you don't have teams structured by around your org chart. You'll probably have a conversation with IT saying, why are you creating all these teams? And what you can say is, I'm creating them with purpose. They're solving real business problems, and I can articulate to you exactly why we're doing this, as opposed to just having Paul's team or Kevin's team or whoever's team that you're setting up in that environment as well.
So as we start to wrap up, Paul, again, I want to thank you and appreciate that you've chosen to join me in the middle of the night on a Saturday morning, early Saturday morning. What didn't I ask that I should have, or that you wish I would have asked, or maybe even what's something that you think, man, we could have spent a little more time on?
That's a good question. It's something that we are experiencing ourselves right now, being acquired by another organization, and it's the how do we get the team on board in terms of agreeing to or getting some consistency in the way that we communicate with each other, work together with each other, and have those shared expectations and shared alignment between different stakeholders that we work with. This sounds like a really simple thing to do, and it's probably something that 95% of us completely ignore or forget about when we start a new project or have a new team member join or things like that. But it's just making sure that we sit down and we make the time to be effective, because being effective actually brings the efficiency down the track. So let's take a step back, build some redundancy into this process, and have a conversation around how do we want to agree that how we want to work together. Like, where do we want to communicate for this project, or how do we want to communicate as a team? What does that mean in terms of those sensible default choices we make across the different types of work that we do? Because when you mash two organizations together like we're doing at the moment, there's some good things that happen pretty naturally, but there's stuff that you need to just talk through together. And whether that's bring people together, starting a new project, creating a new virtual team, whatever that is, taking the time to think about just how we work, what that work experience should look like, what tools we're going to use most of the time to do that, and what does that mean of the behaviors we're going to start doing, the behaviors we're going to continue doing, and the behaviors we're going to stop doing. And if we can kind of have that conversation, that'll solve probably 90% of the challenges that come with feeling overwhelmed with technology or feeling challenged with technology. The other 10% might be digital literacy or digital fluency challenges, and you've got people in your team that can probably help you through those processes as well. There's always someone that a peer or someone nearby that, think about Excel, right? There's always that one person that is like loves Excel and knows every formula in Excel, can solve any, get your pivot table going, can talk about the differences between VLOOKUP and all the different performance things with formulas, right? There's always someone in your business that can do that. So no matter what technology we're talking about, there's someone like that that can guide you through that process. That doesn't mean you have to call up the service desk or call up IT for that support as well. So, back each other and support each other through the process too.
For the third time, we will say together that we as leaders don't have to have all the answers, and we'll be better served by finding those that have those answers. So, Paul, thank you so much for joining us as a part of this sort of series around the future of work, bringing in expertise that we don't have, and bringing in a perspective and bringing in a part of the world that where we don't live. We certainly appreciate that. Very much.
Right.
And I couldn't have asked for this to be better. Yeah, please go ahead.
Can I just add one thing, just to make it a slight bit better as well, if that's okay? There's just something that came to mind as one other thing that I'd love to share as well, is when it comes to your team, the expectations that you place on your team or the expectations they place on themselves have much more of an impact in this than the technology itself, in the future of work, in this world of hybrid work that we're going to and things like that. So we did some research that an individual's perceived expectation of what they think their manager thinks drives a lot of their behavior around out of hours work or work outside of time zones or physical locations, or like the way that they engage in their work in this digital workplace that we have. It's not necessarily having an iPhone in your pocket that kind of drags you back into work and screws up your work-life balance. It's really around that expectations that you have with your manager. So as a leader, the one thing I'd say as a takeaway is make sure you sit down with your team, have that conversation about make sure you've got those shared expectations and that shared alignment so everyone's on the same page of how people want to work. Otherwise, people are going to fill those gaps for you, and it's going to drive your team to think they probably need to work more than they need to do things that's probably going to get their work-life balance out of whack. And generally have more burned out employees in the long term, which is what you don't want as a leader. You want the exact opposite of that. So.
And if we really want the opposite of that, we need to let people know that. Oh, by the way, it's not their job to read our mind. So I want to, Paul, I want to thank you again so much for being here. And if you all have enjoyed this, I can tell you that on September the 30th, you're going to want to join us for our live cast, where Wayne Trammell, my co-author for Long Distance Leader and Long Distance Teammate, and I and some other guests are going to come together for a dedicated time in a different platform than the one that you're on now. That'll give us a chance for a true community conversation. We're going to share some of the very latest of our thinking around all of this. You can learn more and sign up for free by going to remoteleadershipinstitute.com/livecast. We hope you'll do that. And if you enjoyed our time with Paul, you need to do two things. You need to go buy a copy of his book. And the other thing that you need to do is tell your friends to come back and watch the recording of this episode. Hope that you'll do that. Paul, thanks again.
I appreciate it, Kevin. Thank you for having me. And it was well worth, there's not many things that are worth getting up in the morning for in the middle of the night, but I really enjoyed this conversation. I love talking to people about this topic. And please tune into the rest of the Future of Work series because I think I've already seen from the previous episodes some good content coming out as well. So thank you for doing this, Kevin.
Thank you, and thank you, everybody. That means only one last question for all the rest of you. One question that you've got, I'm going to leave you with, as I always do. And there it is. What are you going to do with this if you don't take some action from this? What was the point? Answer that question for yourself and make it a wonderful day. Paul, thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Happy Saturday.
Thank you. Thank you from the future. See you later.
Right, thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.